Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with Paul Hawken at the Global Philanthropy Forum 2020 conference. I should note that Paul spoke at the first ever Global Philanthropy Forum conference in March of 2002. So it's definitely time for a reunion. Most folks know Paul as the founder of Hawken and Smith, one of the original social businesses. But he's the author of no fewer than, is it 7 books or 8 books?
8.
8, and he's in the midst of another. But I have to say my favorite, just based on the title, is called Blessed Unrest, How the Largest Movement in the World Came into Being and No One Saw It Coming. So, but we're going to talk a little bit more about Drawdown. Just to set the stage for a minute, Paul, here we are. We're both in Northern California right now. Where wildfires are burning as they are in Oregon, perhaps not caused by climate change, but greatly exacerbated by the drying and heating that is fueling the spread of the wildfires. So that's one shock we're dealing with. And the second, of course, is the global pandemic, COVID-19. And climate scientists have been telling us for a long time that this won't be the only pandemic, that there will be others, that global warming really affects the shape and the spread of infectious diseases. And then finally, I think the most insidious of the shocks that we're feeling, Paul, right now is the disproportionate effects, health effects and economic effects on people of color of both the wildfires and COVID-19. And I know that, Paul, you started as a child, you were an environmentalist, as a teenager, you were a civil rights advocate. This combination must be particularly hard on you. And so why, as it is hard on our country? So why are you so positive?
Positive. I got to what Larry Klamer said, really, which is, I'm not interested in hope. I'm interested in courage and action. Hope is just the pretty face of fear. I mean, every hope depends on a fear. And I think what we need to be right now is fearless, as opposed to hopeful, which is kind of a little anemic in a way. I'm hopeful. Well, why? And so we can basically look at everything that's happening and realistically. And what I appreciate, and this sounds odd about COVID-19, is that it just pulled the curtain away from the extraordinary injustices, extraordinary dysfunction, the extraordinary impact that our distant industrial systems have been having on the world for quite a long time. And when people say, well, go back to normal, that we realize that actually we were in abnormal for a long, long time and become adjusted to it and accustomed to it. And it wasn't normal at all. And so COVID has really revealed that, as the George Floyd assassination, of course, also then brought forth 1619, it brought forth this extraordinary legacy of racism and cruelty, frankly. And for me, as a civil rights worker, having worked March on Montgomery, worked for, as press coordinator for that when I was young, and for sure. And I really thought, with the Voting Rights Act and so forth, that, we had, in a sense, an era had changed. And I think in some small way it had, actually, but I thought it had changed in a much greater way than it really did. And I feel like what happened with Black Lives Matter is that, I'll just speak for myself. I said, God, the racism is absolutely endemic to me. And I mean, it's easy to say white privilege, but in a deeper sense, I feel like that's also been a blessing. I mean, George Floyd, traditionally, I think we'll look back as a martyr. in the sort of the Christian or the religious sense, of somebody whose death, actually created, real change, and not to say only his death. And so I see this moment as a teachable moment, as opposed to, God, we're really screwed, because so much is coming forward. At the same time, I do recommend everyone to see Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix, Jeff Orlowski's new film about social media. And if you have any question about why is becoming so polarized and so ridiculous in terms of the discourse in the world, see Social Dilemma. It's a beautifully, beautifully well done film with Tristan Harris and others, talking about, in a sense, that we've created another extractive industry. But this time it's extracting our brain, our innocence, our children, and using it against us in a way that it was never designed to, but in fact it does, and so forth. So I feel like, and anyway, I mean, I'm looking at the smoke outside too, but I do feel, and when I was a child, I used to, not child, but teenager, I lived in Sierras. I used to fight fires, but these fires are different. We never fought fires like this. We didn't have the wind, and I think, not only is the dryness, but it is the wind itself. We just didn't have those kind of winds at the same time, and so forth. So we are in a new era. There's no question about that. Yeah.
So, but there are solutions, right? There are solutions to racial injustice, and there are solutions to climate change. And what's been striking to me is in your book Drawdown, which I'm sure all our viewers have read, because it's got 100 fascinating ways not to mitigate climate change, but to reverse it. Say something about, these are solutions that are already at hand. Perhaps provide an example, an example that individuals can act on, as well as things that take governments and the private sector, et cetera.
You've really hit a nail on its head with that question, because the way we see climate and reversing global warming is the polarity of government and individuals. And so, and then you had this argument, well, individuals really can't do much, but they can do something, but it doesn't really, accumulate to much, and governments are slow and corrupt in many cases, and go through electrical cycles that makes them unwilling to commit to really brave things. And so you look on both sides, you go, oh my God, and I feel like one of the things that we don't understand is that, yes, it is individual, but we don't really look at agency, because we have to look at the individual in context, not as an individual. Of course it's an individual, it's a person, but of course one of the great diseases that we have is to think that we are individuals. I mean, that we're separate, from each other, from nature, and so forth. And the climate crisis doesn't cause injustice. It does. It actually was created by injustice. It's a figure ground shift. All right. And so when we look at solutions, we have a lot of them in Drawdown and so forth. The new book I'm doing, Regeneration, has more. But what it does is talk about your question, what to do. And if we actually, after this, go outside, go to somewhere, I know we have masks on and so forth, but ask people, what are you doing about climate change? And they'll go, what are you talking about? I talk to any essential worker, and they're going, and then ask people who care, presumably many of all the listeners, but actually just people care, and say, do you know what to do? And people say, well, I should probably change my diet, or if I could afford an electric car, or I should, hang my clothes up and not use the dryer. I mean, it's just such wimpy things, all true. And that's where we are right now. 99% of the world is disengaged. So when we ask the question about what can individuals can do, we have to ask a deeper question, is why don't they want to do it at all? And that really goes back to the way we've communicated climate we've communicated in such a way that actually turns people off. It's like what Sir Kenneth Robinson talked about. We educate children to be professors, and so that their bodies are around carrying their head, and instead of actually, what can we do that actually engages human beings, the human population? And we do that when we address current human needs, not future existential threat. Because unless we're going to where people live and what they need now, today, in terms of, their food deserts, food apartheid, health, education, security. I mean, unless we go there, and I think many of the people participating are doing that, by the way, so I'm not, but I mean, then we're going to be a small, tiny minority movement, in the world watching it go to flames. So the most interesting that individuals can do actually is, I mean, in 37 states in the United States, they can do with a phone call or online, they can change all of their electricity to renewable energy, boom, within an hour. And that's the biggest impact that a business, a householder can have. Now, if you're a renter and so forth, it can become problematic in terms of the building and so forth like that. But in terms of anybody who has control over the utility, that's the most important thing people can do today. Right?
When you talk about what we need now, if Donald Trump were in this conference, he'd say what we need now is jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so how might addressing or reversing warming change the labor market?
Well, such an interesting question. I mean, after Drawdown was published, and what we did is we modeled and measured the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming, and we also named the goal. Let's not mitigate, as you said. Let's not fight it. Let's not tackle it. Not even net zero. We need to actually bring the carbon back home and reverse it. No other goal makes sense, first of all. And the bigger the goal is, the more outrageous the goal, the more innovation and creativity comes out and emerges. When you have a goal that's doable, it tends to suppress creativity. And so I was in London, was invited to address the Commonwealth of Nations and the 52 high commissioners. And I was talking about it. And then in Q&A is always where you learn something when you're a speaker. You never learn anything when your mouth is open. And the questions were fascinating, and what I took away from the questions as I walked away that day was that these were the high commissioners, and they represented every ministerial in their country: finance, defense, housing, transport, agriculture, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And they thought that greenhouse gases belonged in the portfolio of the environmental minister, of course, but not theirs. And so the reason I started thinking about regeneration then was the subtitle of the book was going to be How to Create 1 Billion Jobs. Because basically the solutions to climate change actually generate an incredible amount of jobs, because what we have right now is an economy that's stealing the future. It's stealing it. And we're calling it GDP. And the idea that we can't have an economy that heals the future, that invests in the future, that creates natural capital, that reforests, and completely reverses this degenerative spiral that we're in, is simply a question of attitude and direction.
The reason I asked about connection to jobs is when you go through the book and you take a look at some of the most interesting solutions, each of them achieves another goal at the same time. You don't even need to care about climate or understand the issue of climate or be focused on the issue of climate to want to, for example, raise the status of women and girls or address food security. So say something about the benefits. Let me take an example or two and say something about the benefits other than reversing global warming that can come from many of the solutions contained in the book.
A point so well taken, and a point we tried to make, which is they have these cascading benefits. And I mean, to say that educating girls is a solution to global warming is true, but it's also so almost reductionist. There's 1,000 reasons to do that, even besides that. And so our solutions really will have uptake when people understand that they benefit personally, their families, their communities, their farms, their cities, their companies, when they benefit from them. And this is the thing that's sort of been hidden or occluded, is that we talk about climate solutions as if we're going to fix it. It's in it, and we're going to fix it. This is the solution. And people feel left out. They feel excluded. But in fact, if you look at the uptake of regenerative agriculture in this country and in Australia, for example, in other countries and so forth, I don't know, I mean, with all due respect, I don't know a single farmer who's doing it because of climate. I don't know one. In fact, I know several who are doing it very, very well, who actually think climate change is even happening. But they're doing it because they have come to that point where they realize the health of their soil is the health of their family, their farm, their third or fourth generation, and they're just about ready to lose the farm, and they've hit the wall. And that wall was that they turned the soil to dirt, and that dirt now is turning back to soil, and it can retain more water. It's more productive. It's more nutrient dense. They're benefiting from it. Their debt is going down. Their costs is going down. Their profits are going up. That's why they do it. And so pretty much there is every single solution to climate change and global warming actually has these benefits. And I think that the climate movement, again, has sort of been siloed and seen itself as like, well, this is a climate solution. But how about solving people's problems? How about helping them? How about people seeing this as something that benefits them and benefits their children and their future and their well-being and so forth? Because that is really where we're going to get the kind of community and global uptake of people wanting to, in a sense, benefit the future in terms of climate change. But it has to be about their current human needs, and not sort of a top-down elitist, excuse me, with all the respect, thing of, we're going to have this solution and this does this, and people are going, yeah, but what about me? What about my family? What about the fact that, and that's that's where the solutions get really quite extraordinary.
So, Paul, I've always been struck by this in you, and that is that you understand the science, right? But you also understand the psychology. And you understand the politics of large issues. I mean, hence the book about the movement no one saw coming. A lot of people feel that in the face of the pandemic, in the face of these fires, in the face of racial injustice, that when we come back from, when we get to the other side of those three issues, that people will, it's unlikely that we go back to status quo ante. That we would start, that individuals would be starting to rethink their relationship to the larger diverse society, that we might rethink the structure of our economy or reimagine the nature of our democratic government. Is this likely to be part of that? In other words, will we be rethinking, are we rethinking our individual relationship to the environment, to the natural environment? Is this a moment?
Well, we could be. It's possible. I mean, most people live in cities now, and they're cut off from the natural environment. They don't really participate. They don't have that experience, and so that is the danger, which is nature and life has become an abstraction, complete abstraction. They're looking at screens all day long, and so at the same time, the possibility is simply social breakdown. In other words, as the stressors become greater, like we're seeing now in Washington, Oregon, and California, I mean, nobody in Talon, Oregon, whose town has got burned to the ground, is thinking about climate change today. They are. They're thinking about clothing, and so we act differently when we're under extreme duress and threat. And so what Larry talked about in terms of shifting emphasis, what Ellen Dorsey's talked about, the Wallace Global Fund, is not only shift emphasis, but start to spend down philanthropy. If we're not spending down our endowments, then what are we waiting for? And as Larry pointed out, those endowments will not be coming back to us in terms of growth or dividends and so forth, unless we actually do start to do that. And I can't think of I can't think of We'll put it this way. What we do now is we're communicating to people that unless you do this, we're going to be screwed. Is that an effective way to communicate? I don't think so. Now, scientifically, absolutely that's true, but it's a bad bedside manner, I can tell you that. It's not going to create healing. And what we have to understand that, and I'll go back to this thing of regeneration. Regenerating the world doesn't mean just farms. It means cities. It means Kibera, in Nairobi. It means all levels of social interaction. I mean, the main cause of this of climate change is a profound disconnection from each other, from us in nature, and habitat fragmentation, what we've done to nature, and we've disconnected nature to itself, actually. And so what we're talking about is stitching together, back together these broken strands of disconnection, and those connections bring us alive. They bring us wonder, they bring us joy, they bring us awe, and that really is what regeneration is about. And so the idea that somehow it's a hair shirt that we have to wear, in order to stop global warming is upside down and backwards, and it will never take, and it won't work. And that's why I think I'm doing the second book to present to people the idea that there could be no better life purpose than regenerating the world, which then regenerates the atmosphere, because that's the relationship between the biosphere and the atmosphere is what we're talking about.
Thank you for pointing to that, the issue of disconnection. Some people call those connections social capital, and talk about the importance of social capital to a vibrant democracy. And I would add that Larry Kramer, CEO of the Hewlett Foundation, who spoke before us, noted that the two existential dangers in his mind are climate change and the loss of our democracy. He argues that as long as we have a democracy, if we lack a democracy, we can't solve any of the problems before us. If we have our democracy, well, we just might.
Yes, and I would suggest that everybody read The Politics Industry by Michael Porter and Catherine Gale, because why is it that 15% of approval rating for Congress every year, 15% of people approve Congress, and 90% of Congress people are reelected? There is a politics industry that absolutely perverts democracy and the will of the people in this country. And so we've got to understand that as well. I mean, we have to look at these systems. Politics is a system. It's a dysfunctional system, even in a democracy, and so forth. But so is all the other, every single industry in this country is degenerative. It's degenerative. It actually is basically stealing the future and so forth. I mean, the second most polluting industry in the world is what? Clothing, after fossil fuels. I mean, the most harmful industry to our children is the food system, the food industry. I mean, Pepsi-Cola has 35,000 trucks that go out every day. It's the biggest trucking fleet in the world, by far bigger than DHL and FedEx and UPS and the post office. And 90+% of it is on what's on that truck. It's Pepsi-Cola, it's Mountain Dew, it's Doritos, it's Tropicana, it's Gatorade, it's 7-Up. I mean, junk food, basically, that's killing our children, causing obesity, type 2 diabetes, and so forth, hypertension, etc. And so our systems themselves are all degenerative. And so rather than just looking at solutions, we also have to look at the entirety of a system. And what does it mean to localize food production, which has happened much more because of COVID-19, interestingly. But what does it mean to have a clothing industry or business that actually respects people? I mean, it's so interesting, Jane, that in 1800, in these satanic mills, textile mills in England, if you actually look at what were people paid in real dollars at that time, they're paid a penny an hour, but it's 34 cents an hour. That's what they're being paid in 1800. This is 2020. The average pay workers get in the garment industry is 34 cents an hour. It hasn't changed in over 220 years. This is, and so these are causes of global warming. You know, they're not like separate. Oh well, we have to deal with a social issue. Of course, it's a social issue, but the fact we have to take away our blinders and say, like, okay, these are the solutions. You know, it's like one. You said, what can individuals do? Stop buying so many clothes. Americans buy 70 to 90 garments a year, one every 5 days. Really? And most of it sits in the closet where clothes go to die. You know, I mean, it's like, and people are afraid to be seen in something that's sort of out. You know, like, oh my God, it's out of fashion. That was last year or less. You know, and so the expanse of possibility and what we have to do shouldn't be what depress us or be overwhelming so much as it, to me, is about possibility, and the possibility is extraordinary.
You're making me feel so good about wearing a jacket I got at a consignment store right now.
There you go. There you go.
Absolutely, the solutions involve all three sectors, right? The
Yeah.
public, private, and the social sector, the citizen sector. And one of the things we are seeing is the sort of reimagination of capitalism as well. And I see you as part of it, having built a social business before any of us knew what a social business was with Smith and Hawken. Are you seeing kind of a new level of responsibility on the part of the private sector as they kind of move forward and see themselves not just as possibly part of the problem, but invariably they're part of the solution?
Yes, absolutely. And just to give in Climate Week, the CEO of one of, I can't say which company, of one of the three largest companies in the world by revenue and employee, is giving a speech that I wrote. And that speech says, today I commit blank to being a regenerative company. And then what it means to be regenerative, you know, in terms of restoration, renewal, the social contract, etc. And so I'm seeing CEOs and our people, they have children. They see the world too. You know, they're not stupid. They didn't get there because they were stupid. They're really brilliant people, and they're seeing that tension between their, you know, sort of the purpose of their internal capital, you know, to grow it, to increase it, so forth, and where the world is going. And so I think we're seeing, you know, you see it at Danone, you see it at so many companies now, really extraordinary men and women who are saying, no, we got to shift. It's time to go, it's time to pivot. You know, I think you're going to see it at Nestle with Mark Schneider. You know, I think you're going to see it in many places where they haven't maybe said anything yet, but I can tell you incipiently, there is a really huge shift. I mean, you're seeing it in terms of plastic. I don't think the most interesting plastic initiatives in the world are coming from the big users of plastic. They know it's a dead end. They can't use plastic as manufactured today anymore. You're seeing Kodak come up with extraordinary processes in terms of taking any polymer and transmuting it in such a way chemically so that it can make any other polymer. So it's beyond recycling, you know, and sorting. So you are seeing this, but at the same time, I think we also have to acknowledge and honor is you're seeing this kind of coming up like a rain in the spring, or, you know, and so forth. You see the first grass coming up. You're seeing all these micro businesses, small businesses addressing human need, you know, in a way that big business can't actually, frankly, and in a way that produces much healthier food. One of the things, I was at a conference last year in Vancouver about Eco City, and I can't remember the question, but I remember what I said. And there's so much talk about cities committing to renewable energy, which is fantastic, of course. I said, but if you're not, if the city isn't committed to renewable food, like a term I'd never used before, by the way, just came out of my mouth. But I thought about it. If our food system isn't renewable, we better look at that one too, you know? And like, so you're seeing from Leah Penniman and Grafton at Soulfire Farm. You see treating African-American farmers, training them and then finding land for them. You're seeing this upwelling across America of the milpa gardens from Bruce Kearns in Nebraska, who give you seeds for a whole acre free, and you cross drill it, and it produces 30 different vegetables and fruits, and then you just let the neighbors or the food banks or the churches or the home come in and pick whatever they want. It's like a big Easter egg hunt, for squash and berries and greens and so forth, and his goal is to double the amount of vegetables in the United States, but make them available locally instead of just 40% of them coming from California. So you're seeing these beautiful imaginative ways in which people are participating in reimagining all of the systems that are, as I mentioned earlier, are degenerative.
Thank you so much, Paul Hawkins. It was a pleasure to hear from you at the first Global Philanthropy Forum. It's really a joy to hear from you now, and knowing that you are pursuing this work and you're educating us and, in fact, empowering us or urging us to use our own power to make a different.
Thank you. I would say one more thing, Jane, and thank you so much. I've been listening to your voice for 22 years, so you're so familiar with the World Affairs Council, but I think I'm not an expert, but I think there are some experts, Bill McKibben, Hal Harvey are coming on, but every climate expert has imposter syndrome. Okay, because it's impossible for anybody to understand the intricate complexity of this relationship between the biosphere and the atmosphere. But that is also a source of wonder and awe. And this is such an extraordinary, beautiful planet that we live on. And so I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being here with me. And thank you for your voice always.
And thank you, Paul, and thank you to Philip Yoon for this extraordinary conference, and to Megan and Claire for all the work they've done on it, and Carla. And we'll turn over to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.